As a candidate, Donald Trump has had a wide berth to talk a lot without saying much. This morning, Time magazine published a new interview with Trump where they asked him serious, probative questions about what a second Trump presidency would actually look like. And it's dark stuff. From a dictatorship only on day one, migrant detention camps, using the Comstock Act to ban abortion, and policing protesters by deploying the National Guard. He told Times reporter that he'd be willing to fire a U.S. attorney who didn't prosecute someone he ordered, noting that it depends on the situation. He explained that obliterating the so-called deep state meant getting rid of bad people, people that have not done a good job for him. He would absolutely pardon criminals convicted of assaulting the Capitol on January 6th, telling Time that many of those people went in, many of those people were ushered in. You see it on tape. The police are ushering them in. They're walking with the police. When the reporter asked Trump what he thought of Americans who found his language about being a dictator for a day or suspending the Constitution, contrary to American democracy, he said, "I think a lot of people like it." And much like the last election, when asked if he was worried about violence, Trump acknowledged that it would only happen if he loses, which sounds an awful lot like a threat. Joining me now is Robert Kagan, Washington Post editor-at-large, senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, and author of Rebellion: How Anti-Liberalism is Tearing America Apart Again, which was published today. A timely book. We're going to talk about it shortly, but I want to talk about this Time interview. If I had one criticism of it, Robert, it was the way that they placed Donald Trump's plans, including letting states monitor women's abortions, monitor women's, I guess, menstrual cycles. I don't know how they would do that. And they placed it against, well, here are all the legislative barriers to that, as if there would be legislative barriers, as if there would be some sort of normal functioning democracy with him as president. What did you make of the interview and the revelations therein? Well, I'm sorry. I have to admit, I haven't read the interview, although I've seen the quotes that came out of it and what you just read. And I think there is a general tendency, unfortunately, in this country to just assume that because our system has been functioning, because the institutions have been operating for many years, that they will save us ultimately. But I think that the founders of the Republic could have told us that it isn't the institutions by themselves. The people have to act correctly. The people have to understand what threat exists right now from Donald Trump in terms of becoming a dictator. They spoke of the need for virtue, and by which they meant the people rising up to protect our system against a dictator. I don't mean rising up illegally. I mean rising up electorally, forcing congressmen to do the right thing, et cetera. So I think we can be very passive sometimes and just hope that the institutions will save us, but I think that's a mistake. Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to put up a limited list of the things that Trump has said he would do in 2025. Mass layoffs of civil servants and replacing them with loyalists, terminating the Constitution, politicizing the DOJ to investigate his political adversaries, bomb Mexico, shoot migrants, electrify the wall, no two-state solution in the Middle East, end birthright citizenship, revoke student visas for ceasefire protesters, reinstate and expand the Muslim ban, gut the EPA, exit the Paris Climate Accords, a national ban on trans care for minors, punishing hospitals that provide any transgender care, teaching what he calls patriotic education, terminate the Department of Education. I could go on, allowing states to punish women as they see fit, enforce the Comstock Act to ban abortion nationwide. I mean, everything he has in here, shoot shoplifters, federal takeovers of democratic cities. And people hear that, see that, read that, and say, I want that. What should we make of that? Well, he was right at the end of, I guess it was, I don't know, it was the end of that interview, but it was the end of your quotations when he was asked, what does he think about, violating the Constitution, et cetera, and calling yourself dictator of a day. And he said, the people like it. And I think that's a very important point that we are not focusing enough on. This isn't just about Donald Trump. He does have a very powerful, very mobilized constituency that is fundamentally seeking to overthrow the fundamental liberal system that the founders created. They oppose it. They oppose it because they think that
their view of the nation, they have an ethno-religious definition of the nation. For them, the nation is a white Christian. For some of them, it's a white Protestant nation. This is an old strain in American history, after all. This didn't just pop up. It's just what's happened now is that these people who've always been around, they were part of the John Birch Society, they were part of the McCarthy movement, they were in the South during the slave years, they were in the South during the Jim Crow years. But now, for the first time, certainly in many decades, they've taken control of one of the political parties, and they have a leader who is essentially determined to destroy the system for his own purposes, but what they see is the opportunity to change the system in a way that is more to their liking and therefore not consistent with what the founders intended.
Well, and they've corrupted, you know, this sort of ethos has corrupted the Supreme Court, right? I mean, I detect a desire to institute a kind of religious diktat over the country from people like Samuel Alito. And you know, I've talked about repealing the 20th century as being a core goal of MAGAism. It feels like what offends them is that the 20th century made, and you talk about this in your book, what the Constitution sort of prescribed as a kind of small L liberalism, right, where there's individual liberty. The 20th century is the great American century because it actually made that more real for women, for workers, for, you know, what used to be child laborers, for people of color, for immigrants, for black people. And they are offended by it, by the whole 20th century.
That's right. And it's important to separate that from what they talk about. They're upset about wokeness. But, you know, right. People were upset about wokeness back in the civil rights era, too. Yeah. There were many whites who were upset about the civil rights movement, and they regarded it as the wokeness of their time. So it's really true that it is the fundamental elements of our system that they're opposed to, even though they want to say that that's an excess of wokeness. And I just think we need to understand that it isn't just the whims of Donald Trump. And you know, one of the reasons that he's talking the way he talks is that his most reliable group of supporters are what I think you can't have a better word for them than white nationalists. He ran in his first campaign, people don't remember, I think, back in 2011 when he was his first run for the presidency, he ran on a one issue, which was birtherism, which was basically to say that the first black American president was not really an American. And in so doing, he signaled to those people that he was their representative. And they have basically chosen him as their leader. And they are essential to him because as he goes through these court trials, as he faces the various pressures that he faces in the system, he can't rely on your average, you know, Mitt Romney voting Republican. He has to rely on these hardcore white nationalists, in some cases white Christian nationalists, who are sticking with him no matter what happens in the trials.
And this is the book. We're going to talk more about it on the other side of the break, because I want to get into some of your thesis, which is really about these people saying that they are the super patriots, but how they fundamentally disagree with the founders on what the system is. You talk about that in this book. We're going to do that on the other side of the break.